All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting daily vlog. This is Daily Vlog 2025, number 49. And today, got my, I got the books for Through the Shattered Grid and the Techno-Organic Secrets Essence 20 books. They're literally right over on my bed because I felt absolutely horrible this morning for most of the day, to be perfectly honest. And so I wasn't able to get out of bed until like 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And when I finally got up, turned my computer on, I noticed that I have emails from Renegade saying, hey, we delivered your books today at 1 p.m. So they were chilling in like -7-degree weather for like 6 hours on my front porch. Luckily, nobody decided to take them because for whatever reason, delivery drivers no longer like knock on your door or ring your doorbell or do anything to acknowledge the fact that there are packages there. And no matter how many times we ask them to put them on the back porch, they seem incapable of doing that. So I left them on my bed to just let them warm up because they're freezing cold. But the covers look pretty. So yeah, I got those. I'm excited to see when that new, what is it, Wraith and the Giants solo board game thing comes. Because again, I'm kind of excited about that. It looks like fun. And despite the fact that still feeling like crap, the past couple weeks I've actually been like making a dent in my in-depth review backlog. I think I've gotten in the last couple weeks I've gotten like 2 in-depth reviews out. Have I? Something like that. I should probably like look at it. So we had the Transformers one on the 16th, and then did I have another one? Yeah, and then the Quartermaster's Guide back on the 8th. So yeah, I'm not doing bad on my in-depth reviews. I'm finally getting caught up on that. I'm hoping to get Essential Essence 20 up and going again. Again, I filmed an episode of it back in like November or October, but it had been so long since I filmed the episode that I decided it'd just be easier to re-record that one than try and remember what I said when I start doing, because it was just the base leader class or whatever it's called. I can't remember what it is. Field Commander. It was just the Field Commander, because that's the next class in the book. And so I would have had to do the focuses. I always do the focuses separately, and trying to remember what I said from like half a year ago, which is not going to work. So that's going to be a thing. I have, again, I've got one more Essence 20 in-depth review to do. I want to do an in-depth review on the new Monster Manual. And there is a TTRPG that I backed a couple years ago, I think at this point, that I'm going to be doing an in-depth review on because it's finally been made available to purchase to non-backers. And so I want to do an in-depth review on it because it's unique and interesting, and it has a class called Battle Princess. So how could you not adore it? So yeah, I'm, as much as, again, I have to fight with myself literally every day to get out of bed. I am really happy that I've been able to actually make a dent in this thing that I've been trying to make a dent in for months. So that's nice. And yeah, I have been playing, I can't remember the name of the game now. Hold on a second. Okay, so the game itself has a really, really long title, but the name is Record of Lodoss War, Deedlit in Wonder Labyrinth. And it's a game that came out years ago. It's a Metroidvania in the style of Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And when I say in the style of, I mean, if you have played Castlevania Symphony of the Night and you start playing this game, you will go, hey, I don't remember this stage in Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Like, the art style is very, very similar. The controls are somewhat similar, but different enough that it's unique. And it's set in the Record of Lodoss War world. And if anyone doesn't know what that is, the Record of Lodoss War was a light novel series that actually began its life as what was called a replay. And I've made videos about this before, but I find it so fascinating that I love just talking about it over and over again. Replays are the reason that tabletop RPGs, are as popular in Japan as they are. Replays are the reason that Call of Cthulhu is the #1 TTRPG in Japan. With everybody else, like D&D and I can't remember what it's called, Sword something. What's it called again? Starts with an S. Sword World, which is kind of a Japanese kind of version of D&D. It's not like a OGL game. It's a completely its own game, but it's your kind of standard high fantasy tabletop RPG. That is, if I remember correctly, I believe it's a little bit more popular than D&D over there as far as like fantasy RPGs are concerned. But anyway, so Record of Lodoss War was what was called a replay. And what a replay was it was basically a retelling of a TTRPG session that was published in like magazines and the things like that. And this particular one actually had some kind of famous people. There was a science fiction writer that actually played the character of Deedlit. But this particular one, the first season of it was actually a retelling of their home, the group's home Dungeons and Dragons game. Like, it literally was a Dungeons and Dragons campaign that was turned into a replay, and then the replay was received so positively that it was eventually translated into a light novel and then a manga, and then it was translated into an anime series. And you can still watch today. They have it on Crunchyroll. So if you want to watch it, again, it's old like 80s, early 90s anime. So if you've never seen like classic anime back then, especially if you watch the dub instead of the sub, the sub's not going to be too bad, just because anime was much better understood in Japan than it was in the US. But the dub it's not horrible, but it's old school anime. But yeah, so the Record of Lodoss War was this D&D campaign that they just decided to write it out, and I don't think it necessarily started the replay genre, but it definitely popularized it. And there are tons and tons and tons of replays that exist now. You can find a lot of them on things like YouTube and other stuff like that. And that's, again, that's one of the reasons why Call of Cthulhu is as popular as it is because the replays that are made of Call of Cthulhu are extremely popular. The kind of nihilistic, oppressive elements of Call of Cthulhu tends to kind of fit in with some of the more popular media genres in Japan, so they just kind of work together really well. So anyway, I've been playing this game and it's absolutely lovely, and it's a pain in the ass. Just funny because I love Metroidvanias. I love Castlevania specifically. I've beaten Symphony of the Night like, I don't know, 3 or 4 times at least, and I've played through major portions of it and then got bored and left it probably dozens of times. It's an amazing game. But this particular game is a lot harder than Castlevania Symphony. Like, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is not a hard game. It really isn't. It's a beautiful game and it's an amazing game, but once you know what you're doing, it's not a hard game. Like, even the final boss is really not that difficult. Especially if you pick up the Chrysogrim and can just melt them with your blender of blades. This one actually takes a lot of work. But it's super, super good, cool. And it just kind of got me reminiscing about how storytelling has kind of changed in tabletop RPGs and how it hasn't changed. Like, again, if you watch the anime or read any of the light novels or anything like that, like the story of Record of Lodoss War is well written. It's interesting to follow, but it's not, particularly groundbreaking now. Like, a lot of the themes that you see in there are not that amazing. You'll probably see a couple of the plot twists coming. But back when it first came out, especially since, again, this wasn't like an anime TV series that was written by a team of writers or something like that. This was a D&D campaign that they eventually just started retelling what happened in the Kika campaign, and it turned into this really cool thing. To the point where after the first season, effectively, they actually moved on from D&D because it was starting to limit their ability to tell the story. So they actually created their own TTRPG called the I think it was either the Record of Lodoss War Companion or just Lodoss War Companion. And I don't know if it still exists now. I mean, the books and stuff still exist. I don't know if it's still being supported now. But they had multiple kind of revisions of it for decades. But the idea of, storytelling, because I've been having, let's call it a conversation on my video from yesterday where I talk about 4th edition and the kind of dishonest editing tricks that the other person that I name dropped there, not going to do it here, did. And I've been having a conversation and talking about 4th edition. It kind of brought up other conversations that I've seen talk about kind of the evolution of tabletop RPGs, and especially when you start talking about OSR, which stands for Old School Revival type stuff, where people kind of claim that, old school D&D wasn't about telling stories. It was about killing monsters and getting loots. And that's not true. Like, D&D has always been about telling stories. Now, the original D&D, like the old 1974 version of D&D, the vast majority of the rules were around combat. And so most people were arguing, like, well, all of the rules are about combat. This is a combat game. No, combat is the most complicated thing that you're going to do in most tabletop RPGs. So you need a lot of rules to be able to govern it. Especially since the vast majority of people that are playing tabletop RPGs have absolutely no knowledge of how actual combat works. Like, in a situation where you have to try and, like, lie to a guard to try and get you into a place you're not supposed to be, all people have a general understanding of how lying works. And they can kind of figure out what they think would be a convincing lie versus, something that's going to be easy to read through. So you don't need as many rules for that stuff because we can just lean on our own understanding. But the vast majority of people that play D&D, first of all, have never been in a fight, or the fights that they have been in have been very, very limited. Meaning that maybe you got into like a fist fight or a brawl when you were younger or something like that, but you've never been in a life or death situation just in general, where your ability to defend yourself is going to be the difference between you seeing tomorrow or not. That's something that is very, very unique. Combine that with the fact that in addition to most people having no idea how combat works, we're also talking about an archaic form of combat that hasn't been taught regularly in 100 years, easily, maybe 200 years. Swordplay is just not taught in the ways that it used to be. If we go to like Renaissance Italy, fencing was practiced by massive portions of the population. Go to the Middle Ages, everybody knew how to use some sort of weapon, especially if you were in medieval England. Peasants were required to spend a specific amount of time practicing with a longbow, so that they could be called up into militias when needed, to the point that archaeologists can actually identify people that lived in that time period, because English longbows were game-changing in medieval combat, because they had incredible range and accuracy at those extreme ranges. But in order to do that, they had pretty high pull weights. Like, you had to be... The reason that people were required to practice with the longbow so much was because it wasn't something that you could just pick up and use. You had to be trained. And what would happen is people that use longbows a lot, their skeletal structure would actually change. And they would have more developed shoulders and the things like that, because they were being used so often to pull these very high draw weight bows. So I always find that fascinating. So anyway, kind of going back to the idea of, well, like original D&D was just a combat simulator. No, it wasn't. They just had more rules for the things that most people didn't understand. And so they needed more rules. When you look at something like Record of Lodoss War, like, it's obvious that people were telling very interesting, unique stories. The Forgotten Realms was Ed Greenwood's custom campaign setting that he used to tell tons of different stories. In Dungeon Magazine, if I remember correctly, they had a regular segment about Realms lore, where Ed Greenwood would just pick a topic in the Forgotten Realms and write an article about it. And it was fascinating, but storytelling was a big part of Dungeons and Dragons all the way since its inception. Look at the world of Greyhawk and what happened with Bigby and Mordenkainen, and the Circle of Eight and all that stuff. Like, they were telling stories, even if a lot of their gaming sessions did revolve around a lot of combat and dungeon delving. They were still telling really interesting, unique stories. And the further we get away from that original version of the D&D, the more storytelling elements they start adding in, so that it's easier. It's either easier to tell stories, or it helps guide you in the stories that you can tell. Because that's another thing that can be really, really kind of paralyzing for a new GM or a new player is just simply not understanding, well, what kind of stories can I tell and how can I tell those stories. So things like the alignment grid, as much as, yes, especially in earlier editions, there were mechanical benefits and hindrances to the alignment grid. There were weapons that were keyed to certain alignments. If I remember correctly, in 3rd edition, you actually weren't allowed to form an adventuring party with people that were more than, I think it was like 1 space away from you on the alignment grid. So you couldn't have like a chaotic evil and a lawful good person in the same party. Because they were just too different, effectively, in their motivations. Yeah, as much as, yes, there were mechanical aspects built into the alignment grid, the real benefit of the alignment grid was to help you understand the kind of stories that your character would be involved in and how they would interact with them. It was a storytelling aid. The introduction of backgrounds in 4th edition and then them becoming mandatory in 5th edition. Yes, there are mechanical benefits. They give you some skill proficiencies. Now you get a feat with them. But they were always intended to be role-playing aids. And the same thing was true in 4th edition. I don't think backgrounds were a thing in 3rd or 2nd edition, but it's been a really long time since I built a character in either of those flavors of D&D that I can't 100% remember. But yeah, like I said, I just find it really fascinating. And every time I get back into the Record of Lodoss War, it enchants me. Like, every single time I just find it unbelievably enchanting that these really creative people decided to turn their home game into something that they could share. I mean, they were effectively the first quote-unquote live play. And they predated the other ones by 20 some odd years. Again, I find it fascinating. I find it charming. It's just so interesting to me that there's a quote when Chris Perkins was getting interviewed about Acquisitions Incorporated years ago. Back when it was brand spanking new, they were still playing 4th edition. They were asking him, so why are you doing this? And he goes, well, because I firmly believe that D&D is a spectator sport. I believe you can have just as much fun watching D&D as you can playing it, and I think this is a perfect example. And it was. Acquisitions Incorporated has been the most successful marketing move that Wizards of the Coast has ever done in relation to Dungeons and Dragons. Like, the fact that it's still going well over a decade later, the fact that there's an official Acquisitions Incorporated source book for 5th edition, like, that's a really, really big deal. So yeah, I really didn't have anything to talk about, especially since I've been, again, having a conversation with someone that's very, very intent on proving to me that 4th edition is just WoW the board game, and it's not. It never was. And they just keep spouting off lies that I have disproven multiple times over. But, yeah, I think it's cool. I think it's really, really interesting that these, board games effectively have been used to tell such amazing and fascinating stories. And they have inspired others. And they have created new things. Again, there's an entire tabletop RPG line that was created specifically so that they can continue their Lodoss War campaign. And then they started a second campaign with, like, the kids of some of their characters from Lodoss War. Like, it's just such an interesting idea that a game designed mostly at that point for. I guess it really wasn't a kids game ever. It was more geared towards young adults. But yeah, it was a game that created amazing, wonderful stories that were shared with the world and were beloved for a long time. And now we have Critical Role having two different animated TV shows and have been broadcasting their D&D games for a decade. Like, that's a whole new realm of nonsense, in the best way physically possible. And we have other stuff. We have Dimension 20. We have Harmon Quest. And yeah, just something I've been thinking about. So let me know if you guys know any kind of interesting TTRPG things, like replays that turned into anime or stuff like that. Put in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, excuse me, that is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right, bye bye.